Listen, we only get one shot at this.
Why not live life on our own terms? Hey everyone, it's Tom Kradza, and on this episode of the Your Life, Your Term show, we sit down with Dr. Jeff Perron. He's a clinical psychologist from Ottawa. We've had him on the podcast before, and we brought him back to talk about a bunch of stuff. We start talking about quarantine fatigue, and we actually end part of the discussion near the end about quarantine fatigue as well, because I think that's probably something we're all kind of going through in different ways. And we also talk about schemas and core beliefs and values, and he asks me some questions of my own thinking, and at the end, he had some extra time, so we just kind of wander into discussion about real estate and real estate investing and cash flow and that kind of stuff. So we're all over the place. And that's what I really like about doing this podcast is I get to sit down with people I enjoy speaking with and just having a meandering discussion. So hopefully you enjoy this as well. And that's it for, we are going to link to Dr. Jeff Perron's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So if you want to get through to him, he is in the Ottawa area. You'll go to the show notes of this episode and you'll find his LinkedIn profile. So if you need to reach him for any reason, that's the best way to find him. And if you are listening to this and you want to jump into some of the real estate stuff going on in the Greater Toronto and Golden Horseshoe area, you can sign up for the next 90-minute introductory training class we do. That's where Nick and I jump on to go through all the different strategies that we're using right now and to share the very latest data that we're looking at. So for example, very recently, we've been looking at some Ryerson data where they're coming out talking about how the new household formations in the greater Golden Horseshoe. So like think, I guess Belleville, Ontario, right around to Niagara, how that particular area is going from 50,000 new household formations a year to 70,000. So it's an absolutely massive increase on a percentage basis. And that's going to drive a lot of what happens to real estate here over the next decade. So on that introductory training class, we share a lot of that thinking, a lot of our data points, a lot of the strategies that we're using with different investors. And you can register for the next class by visiting CanadianRealEstateTraining.com. That's www.CanadianRealEstateTraining.com. Nick and I stick around after to handle the chat and answer any questions that you might have in the chat. And that's it. So you can go to CanadianRealEstateTraining.com to register for that. That's enough with the intro. Let's jump into the show.
Are you ready to live life on your terms? Is it time to take charge? Real estate, business building, the economy, health and nutrition, and more. It's the Your Life, Your Term show with Tom and Nick Kradza. Are you ready? Let's go.
Hey everyone. So we are live with Jeff Perron. Jeff, I know my own team here makes fun of me always asking about people's last name, but I just want to confirm it. How do I say your name properly?
Well, I've got a lifelong struggle with that myself because my dad's French from Northern Ontario. So he grew up French as his first language. I've got a French last name, and my brothers and I went through French immersion at school. So we don't have a perfect French accent. So I struggle with the proper pronunciation of my own name. And when I moved to Ottawa, obviously there's a lot of French speakers, a lot of bilingual people who just like switch back and forth English, French in the same sentence. And sometimes they correct me on my pronunciation of my own name. So I kind of anglicized it back to Perron just for simplicity. So you're good with Perron.
Perron. Okay. But someone out there is laughing at the way we're both saying it. I fully appreciate it. And I guess I should say Dr. Jeff Perron. Why am I not saying doctor at the beginning? Yes. So you, just so for anyone who has not heard you before here on this podcast, can you just give us the little intro just about yourself, just for context before we dive into things here?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in Ottawa. At this point, we're all remote. So we're in the pandemic remote working situation. But my day-to-day is primarily working with people with depression, anxiety, stress, burnout. Some of the more, I hesitate to say more kind of serious or acute mental health conditions as well when it comes to maybe more acute bipolar disorder, bipolar 2, and things of that nature. But most of my practice is depression, anxiety disorders related.
You are needed in today's world. Let's face it. When you were saying depression and anxiety, we were just talking before we started recording. I'm like, there's some days where I'm getting up and just thinking, oh, was there anything new happening today? Like, is it the same old thing again? And I have like dreams of going to a restaurant, which I know sounds crazy, Jeff. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm like, can I just go to a restaurant? Anyway, so we're gonna dive into that. But I'm curious. We took a bit of a poll that I shared with you here at Rockstar on some of the different things, and the number one thing everybody asked about was quarantine fatigue. Is that I gotta imagine this is affecting your practice, this whole pandemic? And is there, just before we dive into some of the deeper stuff, is that something just common that you're seeing in almost everyone? Or are there some people who are just not affected by this quarantine and don't have this quarantine fatigue? And that's a general question, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't see anyone who's not affected by it. And I think that's across the board in work, my friends, my personal life. And this is impacting everybody to some extent, right? There's nobody out there who's just thriving. And I think in the early part of the pandemic, weeks into it, there were people who were kind of on that Corona vacation, where, oh, it's great, like work from home, the kids are home, cut my commute down, this ain't bad. That is long gone. So I think this is really important and validating for people to hear that nobody's thriving. You and I were talking just off the topic, there's just a general fatigue. The way I describe it is kind of everything's 20% harder right now. Plus we've gotten rid of the things that we do to add pleasure, motivation to our lives, in-person socializing, going to a restaurant, exercising has been hampered. So all of these positive, pleasurable, and mastery activities have been taken away. So if anyone out there who's saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get going, get motivated? It's like, well, because you're a human being.
It's funny because I do have some good days, and I don't want anyone thinking that I'm really in a bad place. So I should give that context. But I do have good days where it's like, oh, you know what? I got a routine. I'm looking forward to different things. And then other days, it'll be when news breaks of like, oh, I think the last one that hit me hard and probably the hardest was this extended lockdown in Ontario. Mm-hmm. When that one was announced, I feel like 2 weeks ago now, for whatever reason that day, I turned into fuck this. I just turned into like, okay, that's like, fuck.
Yeah.
And I understand there's a whole, there's different aspects and everyone can look at this different ways. But that, if I'm just being honest, that was my take. Fuck this.
Yeah. Well, so, and there's something to be said for the uncertainty factor of it. Just, okay, well, we're opening up, we're closing, we're opening up, spring's coming. Oh, by the way, full lockdown. And we can talk about the impact of uncertainty, stress, cortisol levels, and how that's going to affect your
okay. So
your physiology.
Go into that. So when we're uncertain as humans, that just spikes your cortisol naturally.
So to get into all the physiology, I won't go there because that's not my area of expertise. But we do know that humans are flight or fight wired species, and that's really good for evading short-term threats. Because remember, evolutionarily, our purpose is to procreate, propagate, the species, and so we're wired to avoid threats so that we can get on with procreating and raising our family and spreading our genes. And so we're wired such that there's a benefit to having a sensitive false alarm built in, right? Because if there's, and we might have touched on this last time, like if there's an animal sound in the weeds, it's safer if like every time we just flee, like, okay, let's have a stress response. Let's take action. Let's do something. As opposed to, okay, well, I don't know what, let's go investigate it, because then you run the risk of getting eaten. So that same wiring is still present in us today. And so that gets activated, really good for evading short-term acute threats. when we're getting into that being kind of overactivated, like chronically hyper aroused, on edge, then you've got the cortisol running all the time, which has all kinds of impacts downstream on your brain and your physiology, and lead to chronic fatigue, stress, burnout. So I think that's part of what's happening for all of us.
So then, is this where we get into what you've shared before? And I think we want to talk about it a little bit here to frame things. People's schemas and their core beliefs and their values. Where does that fit in? When you talk about that, and it's obviously very important because you bring it up often. And we can dive into specifics of quarantine fatigue and how we can all battle that. But can you start with maybe that schema, core beliefs, and your values thing, just to frame things for us? I love that talk.
Yeah, perfect. So the core beliefs model, aka schema model, is what I work from. So not every psychologist will, but that's my particular orientation. So just to kind of give a tutorial on it, you've got your thoughts, feelings, behaviors is in like the simplest unit of any situation from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint. So picture that thoughts, feelings, behaviors are interconnected. If you have an event and your thought or interpretation is, oh my God, this is so embarrassing, everybody thinks I'm a failure, you're going to feel anxiety, sadness, maybe frustration, anger, and that's going to influence your behaviors. You're going to pull back, withdraw, or engage in other safety behaviors like, let's drink, and then, I can bring my defenses down and interact that way. So point being, your thoughts drive your emotions or are linked to your emotions, which are linked to your behaviors. But where do your thinking patterns come from? That's where your core beliefs come in. So your core beliefs or your schemas are the lenses through which you see the world, and they, part genetic, biological, probably, but a huge part of that is just developmental and environmental. So if we look at various core beliefs, I'll just like throw out the labels, and I did pull up one of the questionnaires that we use to help people identify, okay, what are your core beliefs? So I'm going to read some of those questions just so people have a sense of what I'm talking about here. And
right, because I'm thinking of some of my core beliefs in life. So I'm interested to hear examples, because I'm like, and maybe I'm going to get you to analyze me a little bit or question my thoughts later. Because I'm curious. I want to throw some things that I think are important to me, and I'm curious as to your take. But yeah, if you could share those examples of core beliefs, that'd be great.
So why don't I pick through some that I think maybe could apply to Tom here, and then you can tell me what you think at the end. But either way, it'll give people an idea of what I'm talking about when I say core beliefs. And for people at home, like, don't go and try like self-diagnose here. I'm not treating Tom. I'm not advising anyone to do that. Check in with your licensed regulated health professional. This is just for general information. So okay, if I had to pick some questions here that I would want to ask Tom, I would ask him a series of questions like, bear with me one second as I scroll through.
I didn't mean for you to set me up in real time live here, but now let's do it. Let's see how this goes.
It won't hurt. Don't worry. I feel that people will take advantage of me, and we'd ask people to rate these on a continuum. I often feel I have to protect myself from other people. If someone acts nicely towards me, I assume that she must be after something. It's only a matter of time before someone betrays me. So you can see there that that's a sampling of questions related to this core belief or schema around mistrust.
That's funny, because for me, I'm often told that I trust people too much. That I think a lot of people around me will say, Tom, you always think the best in everybody. They're going to screw you. And I'm always like, well, until they prove otherwise, I feel like in my gut, and I'll use feelings a lot. And I'm like, no, I feel like they're a good person, and I'm going to trust them and do something with them. So when I hear you say those questions, I feel like that does not reflect me.
Okay. Well, that's the good thing. But you also have to be mindful of where that could become a liability as
Oh,
well.
totally. Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
that-
totally.
that-
Yeah,
that's sometimes
Nick
what
reminds
we-
me of that all the time. Like, yeah, Tom, you're way too trusting of people, right? So,
and that's a challenge when you work with clients who do have a strong mistrust schema. Is, well, no, I couldn't, let my guard down because this is a real protective factor, and maybe that's so. Like up to a point, it is. You don't want to be on the side where you're just kind of blindly trusting folks. But the question becomes, when does the belief in mistrust and walking around with kind of like a mistrust lens, when does that become a liability? And that's where I work with folks. Let me ask you some other questions. I think you're seem to be relatively well adjusted, Tom, but let
well,
me
I don't know. You probably just don't know me well enough. Dr. Jeff, you don't know me well enough. Nick would not say that. But yeah, let's go. What's the next set of kind of core
We've got
beliefs?
questions like, I don't fit in. I'm fundamentally different from other people. I don't belong. I'm a loner. I feel alienated from other people. I feel on the outside of groups. No one really understands me. My family was always different from families around us. No one I desire would want to stay close to me if he or she knew the real me.
Oh, wow. So when I hear those questions, I feel like that is like just a general negative connotation to some of those questions, but that it has some accuracy in me that I'll feel like I am a little different than what I feel most people believe. And where that expresses itself for me is that I often will say things like, you always do the opposite of the masses. Whatever the majority of people are doing. This is just like, I think I read this in a personal development book at some point in my 20s, but I always resonated with that. I'm like, if everybody's running to the exit door, I'm absolutely not going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's my personality type. Like, if everybody says, this is the right thing to do, I'm immediately like, I don't think so.
Right.
So, but it's not that I feel like lonely or outside the group. I feel I'm introverted, and most people think I'm extroverted. So if I go to like a conference or something, I'm not going to be the most social person in the room. I'm social with people that I know well, but I don't make new friends very easily. So yeah, there is some truth in those questions for sure for me, but not like where I feel like isolated and alone and I don't fit in.
Well, and you can imagine
maybe
if
this
you
is where
were-
I'm like a narcissist, or I don't even know if I'm using the word properly. I don't feel like I don't fit in. I feel like I understand things, and the way I understand things is right. So that's really, if you really want to know, that's really where Nick will go crazy, and he'll be like, why do you think you're right? You always think you're right. I'm like, well, I don't know. I've put a lot of thought into this. I've done a lot of analysis, and I'm pretty sure this is right. I'm right on this. So when I make a statement about something, I'm pretty convinced that I'm right about it. And I'm sure that's probably maybe not always the most positive trait to have.
Well, I think that it does say something about your values and clarity on your values if you can have confidence in the decisions you're making and the things that you're speaking about. So all of these questions are on a continuum, right? So you can imagine if someone is on the high end of the continuum where they're strongly endorsing something like, I don't fit in, I'm a loner. Rarely are you going to see someone coming like full on, yeah, I'm an outsider, I don't fit in, don't belong anywhere, right? There's usually some conditionality to it. It's like, well, I kind of feel that way, here's how I mitigate against it, here's where that gets in the way in my life. But of course, you do have some clients who are full, yeah, I believe that I don't fit in, I can't fit in, I won't fit in. And that's the level of belief in those maladaptive thoughts is correlated with the level of impairment, right? If that is your lens, that's how you're viewing yourself or the world, then you can imagine how that influences negatively or problematically your behavior.
Is there, I want to ask you some questions on that. Is there another set of questions that you want to give it as an example, or are we good?
Well, I've got hundreds here. I'm going to ask some that I think that a lot of the listeners, if I and know the audience or have an accurate guess about some of the folks in the audience, might endorse, maybe not all the way, but to some extent. So these are questions relating to this idea of unrelenting standards, right? So achievement oriented. I strive to keep almost everything in perfect order. I must look my best most of the time. I try to do my best. I can't settle for good enough. I have so much to accomplish that there's almost no time to really relax. Almost nothing I do is quite good enough. I can always do better. I must meet all my responsibilities. My relationships suffer because I push myself so hard. So on and on and on. So these are a set of questions they
Yeah,
get
I
at
could see,
this
I could see how,
unrelenting
yeah, the
standards.
audience would, some people listening to this, that some of those are going to relate to them. I have a question then about those specifically before we go into core beliefs and how you change them and or that kind of thing. You said something about everything around me needs to be in perfect order. That one kind of resonated with me, and like I think I'm a bit of a control freak. I like having control, and almost the reason that I quit my job, I feel, was because I felt like I didn't have control. Like I always thought before I quit my job that if I ever go, this is when my son was like, I didn't have my daughter yet. My son was like 1 or 2, but I always thought if I go to my boss and say, hey, I need 2 weeks off because my son's in some hockey tournament in the States and I want to go to this hockey tournament in Michigan or something, and I couldn't get that 2 weeks off to be there with my son, you might as well stab me right in the leg, because that's like the worst thing. Like if I get told no there, then I don't care. I'm out of here. And I just remember thinking, because I didn't have that control of my own life, I need to quit my job. Like I can't, and I don't know if that sounds like a weird reason to ultimately quit what people told me was a successful career, but it was enough of a pain point for me that I'm like, I need control of my life here. Like I need control. So when I hear you say that, perfect orders, maybe, you know, a little different way to say, I do like things in order, but I do like control over things. And when I'm not in control, I will do everything quickly with a sense of urgency to try to regain that control. So for example, if Nick and I are faced with a real estate problem, you know, we had a tenant once who threatened us with Environment Canada, who was going to come and shut down the house because there was asbestos siding on the house. And it was when Nick and I were young and we were like, oh my gosh, we're going to like lose everything. Our house has asbestos siding. We came to learn the siding was completely fine, and the guy was just giving us a threat. But we went into information overload, trying to gather, like, reach out to this lawyer, reach out to this paralegal. What information can we get from Environment Canada's website?
Yeah.
Who can we call? And we went into all this information gathering, which was a very normal thing for us. And I think it's a mechanism where we can then get control back.
Yeah.
Because we're like, okay, we have enough information now. We're not out of control anymore. And so
that's a coping strategy, right? Of, okay, let's get all the information. Let's tackle this. Let's problem solve. And it's adaptive in a lot of ways. And this is part of the challenge when you're working with clients with unrelenting standards, where it's been rewarded in a lot of areas in their life, right? Like work, primarily. So well, what do you mean? Like, I'm solving problems. Yeah, this is important. And yeah, it probably is. So it's kind of like a superpower where you turn it on when you need it, and the rest of the time it's off. Because if it's on all the time, then you get into like, I've
with relationships, sometimes with my wife, I'll share an example that I've learned I have to dial that down, because sometimes there'll be a problem at home and I'll go into like, what's the problem? Okay, let's do this, and this.
Yeah.
We'll do this. If that doesn't solve the problem, we'll do this. And I've learned that, like, okay, that's not always the best approach in different situations. I should probably dial this trait of mine down a little bit in certain environments. And it probably took me at least 10 years to learn that. So yeah, I can relate to what you're saying there. Yeah.
And you can kind of see if you've got this is another core belief around vulnerability to harm, which I don't know. You probably have some of this, but this idea, like things could collapse at any moment, like, you know, an economic or health crisis could hit at any time. Like, you got to have your guard up, you got to be aware. And then you have on top of that unrelenting standards. So it's like the world is dangerous. Crisis could strike at any time. And so the way that I'm going to prevent that is like, I'm hard standards, problem solve everything all the time, be on alert all the time. And obviously these are clients who come in and they're burnt out. And you know, it's easy to kind of like make light of it when you're talking from a distance, but when you're looking at someone who's, you know, 40, 50 years old, and they've been doing this for like 30 years, you really, it's like, wow, like you really feel for the person, because not only is that pattern so deeply entrenched, but there's been a lot, you know, relationships, like time with family has been impacted, their health has been impacted, and it can be a, you know, a lot of work to kind of walk that back. So I really admire people who can say like, wow, like I've drifted over here and I need some support to kind of figure out what's going on and come back to my values.
Yeah, and you're right. When you said around the economic part, I probably do have that, you know, where I'm like trying to prepare for any economic chaos at all times. There's something you said in that last list of questions, though, that really caught me, because I hear this a lot, and I feel I do not struggle with this particular thing myself. But you said not quite good enough. I specifically, when I'm sitting down with different investors here and different clients we've had over the years at Rockstar, when they're trying to maybe then branch off from a real estate investing to starting their own business, where they then have to put their face or name behind something and kind of stand for what, and even if they have 30 years of wonderful experience in what they're doing, I find that I see that specific thing that you said a lot, where I almost feel like I need to give them confidence, like, yes, you can do, like, it's obvious to me that you are capable of this and that you'll be great at it. And a mechanism I use to try to help people with that, I'm interested to your thoughts. I say, listen, even if you don't think you're the expert in your field of expertise, give me a ranking of 0 to 10 on how good you think you are. And some people will say, well, I'm only a 6, which I hate that language, but they'll say, I'm only a 6. And I'll say, well, great. There are people out there who are a 0 to 5 in your field. Your 6 is basically expert status to somebody who's a 2 or a 3. So you have tons of value. And not only that if you look at maybe me and you think I'm a 9 in your field, but you're a 6, so that you can't do it because someone else is a 9. The way I speak on something at a level might be different and not resonate with somebody who's a 2 out of 10. And the way you're speaking about it might resonate perfectly and be much better than the way someone else communicates it. So that you have a duty to share what you're doing if you believe in this kind of thing. And that's kind of the way I tackle it. And I don't know if it's the best I've come up with, Dr. Jeff. Okay. This is the best I've come up with, but I do hear that specific thing a lot. And for whatever reason, I think Nick and I don't suffer from it. We feel if we have the proper intention, if we've done the research and we're really trying to do good, that we don't suffer from that not good enough thing.
Well, that's I think again speaks to your values, and you know, I am, without, I'm not trying to assess on the fly, but your ability to kind of see shades of gray is a trait of a very, you know, healthy belief system, you know, and clearly you are in touch with your values, right? You can imagine where, you know, I don't know all the background of the Rockstar story, but you know, I can, from what I understand, you could see how you could easily find yourself totally, you know, like working at hours that you don't want to be working, away from your family, you know, not going to Croatia once a year, doing all because you're making more money, because it's important to grow the business. I think you could probably have taken that path along the development of the organization, but being in touch with your values meant that you didn't do that. And it sounds like the reason you started the company in the first place was, you know, tied into your values. So that, I think that's such a protective factor, where if you have someone who is coming at it from a framework of I'm not good enough, which I would say, I would guess more people than not who kind of walk into say real estate investing, there's probably an element of that there, because they need to achieve more. You know, they need something more for whatever reason. And it could be because they're not good enough, or they don't measure up, or you could be doing more. Your life is fine now, but you could be doing more. So I think that there's probably a lot of work to do for the average person. Well, let me take a step back. I think that when it comes to things like special projects that you're doing in your life to quote unquote get ahead, or personal development, you have to say, like, am I doing this because I'm not good enough, or am I, and there's some status or level that I want or perceive that I need to achieve, or am I doing this because it's so tightly tied to my values, right? And I think that you can look at that financially. There's things that are hard to do, take a ton of time and effort, but that are very well measured and thought through about, okay, this is going to be hard. Here's the cost, but here is how it relates to and serves my values. Same thing with health and fitness. I'm going to take time away from my family. I'm going to change some of my eating habits. I'm going to probably, might create some friction with friends in certain ways with my eating and drinking habits, but it's so tightly tied to my values that I got to do it. But on either of those measures, you can take it too far, where that the health and fitness controls your whole life. The financial piece controls your whole life, and that's coming from a place of fear and maladaptive core beliefs, and not a place of value. So again, I think, to me, this is part of my bias, but it's part of the simplest way I've found to explain these concepts is, like, assess: are you coming from a place of problematic core beliefs, a place of fear, or are you coming from a place of values?
Wow. Man, it's tough to be a well-balanced human.
Yep.
Holy smokes. Hearing that, I feel like we all have problems, man.
We do.
But yeah. No, we do. We definitely do. And then, so you ask these questions to identify people's core beliefs. And from those core beliefs, you can then identify their values and the priority they play, the order of their values. Is that where we're headed with this?
So two separate things: identify the core beliefs, identify the values. When you're identifying the core beliefs, aka schemas, you're also identifying the coping strategies that come with those schemas,
which could be positive or negative.
If we're talking strictly schemas, they're like, we focus on, and we can get a whole commentary, focusing on the negative versus positive psychology. I try to mix both, but in this case, yeah, you can have positive core beliefs, but we're talking about what are the schemas that are getting in the way of your life, and what are the behaviors that stem from that. Even simple things like, if you talk about some of these, I don't fit in, people don't connect with me, people don't meet my needs emotionally, a common behavior. Well, I'm just going to, like, step back socially. I haven't seen friends in, 2 months, but whatever, I don't really need them, and it's fine, whatever. That's okay. There's a problematic behavior right there that's coming from a negative schema.
Got it. So then how do you work on some of that stuff? Just identifying, and then you will then identify that and then say, okay, here's the thought patterns that you need to start changing.
Yeah. So what are the thought patterns? What are the behavioral patterns that come from that schema? And then that's where we say, okay, what are the values? What's the stuff you actually care about in your life? And what do you want your life to be about? So once you have that picture clarified, it's like, here's values-based Tom.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Here's schema-driven Tom. Is what schema-driven Tom is doing congruent with values-driven Tom? If it's not, okay, let's shift. And even if it's, like, scary and it's not clear, what do you think values-driven Tom would do? And then do that thing and see what happens. And that's how you change the pattern.
Okay, so can you give us some example of, like, values-driven person? Like, what are some of those, like, at a high level, like, I don't know, what are some of those values? Is it like, are we just talking like where you place family on your list, or a sense of purpose in your, because I feel like I have a certain purpose to my life, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy coming from that place. So even in this business, it's not all about making money. It's not all about real estate even. It's about, hey, there is a way that we can all live and get through this economic madness. And let's all try to discover that together and share and support each other. And all our decision making, maybe not all, but a large majority of what we do here at Rockstar will come from that place. Not like, let's sell these 10 pre-construction condos to maximize the commission rate on, it's no. But let's come from that place. And I feel like that's me coming from my own values. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. You've got a mission that's tied in with your values. You also have balance across your values. Like you've got a family, you spend family time, you take care of your health, from what I understand, you take care of your eating, you have social relationships, you have, I mentioned family, your kids, your wife.
So then when you're younger,
roles.
Okay. So this is really interesting to me, because when you're younger, if you don't have that sense of purpose in your life, like maybe you've identified, okay, family is very important to me and all these kinds of things, and people can do better with their family or worse, of course, and that stuff. But I find I see this a lot, that people don't know what they want to kind of put the stake in the ground and identify their life to be about. So they struggle with the career they want to get into, or if they should quit their job and focus on something. When you're young, or even in my age, I'm 48 right now, how does somebody go about, because I feel like I found that for me, and I feel very lucky and grateful that I found that for me. But if you don't have that in your life, like that you've identified family and health, but you're still missing this, like what your work, your life's work is going to be about. How do you identify that?
Practice. Trying things, getting out and trying a bunch of different things. And that sounds like a really crude answer, but I'm trying to stop myself from going on a diatribe about the messages that we give to people. Cause I think part of
you rant away.
There's a growing problem with the fact that we tell people that, and I'm part of this culture and upbringing, you're special, your life is special, you're gonna be something, you can find your thing. And when that, I think that's great, and that's positive in a lot of ways. But if the message is you're gonna get that at 18, 19, 20, 25, some people, sure. And then we've got all these people in society who drive culture, musicians, celebrities, who seemingly have found that at 18, 19, 20, 25. And they communicate how they've done it and how your life should be. So this idea that you should or could be special, and not only be special, but be special at age 18, 19, 20, it's just not realistic. But if you take a path where you are engaged in a pursuit, a meaningful journey of trying to identify what do I want my life to be about, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to try different things. You're going to do different things. And eventually, you're going to learn what resonates with you. And I think, you've done that. You had a job that I don't know if you would use the term hated.
But I hated it. I hated it. No, I learned a lot. No, it's weird, but yeah. Okay. So you're touching on such an interesting point here, because I feel like it took me till about the age of 32, 33. And I was working on it aggressively, I would say, for 5 years of like, okay, like I know I don't want to work for somebody. And I knew that at the age of 26 or 27. And I was reading a lot of personal development, or the self-help aisle at Chapters, that kind of aisle of books. Like I was just obsessed with all that kind of reading. And then it got into personal finance and real estate and all those other things, of course. But I feel like I was getting frustrated that I could not find what I wanted to almost dedicate my life to. It was turning into a bit of a frustration. And then when I finally decided, yep, it's going to be real estate. And then when I was able, and it took a couple of years, when Rockstar was born, it was like, hey, we're going to help investors. This seems like a thing where we can actually serve people. And it's a missing thing that we don't find where people are helping investors, because we couldn't find, it was almost just scratching our own itch, right? Classic entrepreneurial kind of story. Yeah. And when the higher purpose of our business came out, that like, hey, we're trying to help people live life on their terms and understand monetary policy, that really was like, oh, wow, this really is something I can dedicate myself to. So it was an evolution and it took years to find. But before I found it, I was pretty frustrated. I got to tell you. Like, so I don't know if I was headed down a healthy path or not. And I feel grateful that I kind of found this, but I feel a lot of people are in that state. So I like what you're saying. Sorry, now I'm rambling. I'm just kind of giving you my stream of thoughts here, but I like what you're saying is that you shouldn't be in a rush to find that. It's just the journey. Develop your skills, find what makes you happy, brings you joy, keep working away, be the best person you can be every day, give a little bit more every day than the day before, and just go down that path. And then something will likely attract you and then go down that path even further. So you're kind of explaining, like, let your life evolve.
And there's got to be trial and error. And I think that if you know what's really important and you protect, your downside, and you have some kind of safety net, which I think you probably did. I don't think you went out and over leveraged yourself.
I probably went out and when I quit my job, many people looking back say, I did not have a safety net, Jeff.
Well, I would argue, and again, from what I understand from the outside, it was probably super scary, but I think you at least knew what was important, and you probably knew that, like, oh, if this doesn't work out, I can just like get another job.
Oh, okay. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Right. So you still had that backup plan, right? So, that's a compliment and a credit, as opposed to, oh, well, it wasn't that hard because you had the safety. Well, no, like it's super scary to take, take this job and shove it, so to speak, and go out on your own. So, how did we get to this point? I think
I took us off. It was me. I took us off this.
No, it's great.
I just like the fact that what you're saying is that, because it's what I see a lot in people, that they're looking for something, searching. And I think there's a certain frustration that I can relate with, because I was in the same place. And I think what you're saying is that the trial and error of things is not a negative. It's what you should do. Try lots of different things, fail at some things, learn from those I always share with people that I believe failure is the raw material you need for success. That if you don't fail a whole bunch of times, you don't know anything. You haven't learned anything. So just go out there and mess up and screw up. And I think that's what I hear you saying as well.
Yeah, you need to try. You need to trial and error. When you're doing it, try, know what your backup plan is for sure, but trial and error.
I think I selfishly took us down this path because it fascinates me. So we can move on, but this is.
Can I throw something else at you?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
So then kind of building on this whole narrative of message, you're special and you should be this, da 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 da. I think there's also messages or forces that pull us into staying in a job, right? And that's great for some people. Like, by no means am I trying to say to people like, oh, if you don't like your job, you should like quit it and start a company. That's right for some people. It's not right for some people. But for you, like, if you had, I see lots of people who were in your position at probably age, 27, 30, and they stay in the job. And then I see them at 40, 50. What do you think that looks like? It's certainly not necessarily a values aligned life. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot to be said for put your head down, protect your family, take your paycheck, and yes, invest wisely, but put the family first. And there's nothing wrong with working a job and kind of building your own little nest egg. We can get all into like, how do you invest safely and all that stuff. But if you are feeling that is not right for you, that's a cue to, begin that process of trial and error, where you're trying new things in order to find, that which is meaningful to you. And that's not gonna, come for free. And I think that's part of the challenge with the messaging, that we should just find this, passion. It's like, well, I'm working at the government. This doesn't feel special. I don't think I have, this isn't my life's work. So, well, it's probably not. For some people it is, but if you're feeling that, maybe it's not. And that you need to try some different things. It could be small, could be large, but that's kind of your cue to try. And I think by trying and learning and growing, that's the only way you can get to a point where you're like yourself, and you can say at, age 48, like, hey, like, I think like this, what I've built here is like pretty reasonably aligned with my values. Like, it's hard, some days
by
are
no
better
means
than
am I trying to
others.
say I have everything figured out and we're perfect and have the perfect business and stuff. No, by no means am I saying that, just to be clear. But I am happy. I am happy that I chose this path for sure.
Yep. And I think that's all we can ask for, is find a path that's meaningful to you, and stick to it and keep plugging away. Cause that's everyone's going to have crappy days, down days, fatigue days, stressful days. And if you don't have that, it's like, hey, here's a thing that is meaningful to me. Here's what the mission is, or the point is. If you don't have that, then how do you move through those rough days?
Yeah, because I find that when I'm struggling, though, those having a greater mission is, and we said this, I think, before we started recording, it really does help. It pulls me through, because there are definitely days where both Nick and I are like, screw this. Like, you want to grab the side of your desk and just flip it. You're like, fuck this.
Yeah.
But it's the greater purpose that definitely carries you through. So yeah, I hearing you speak, I'm just thinking about my son a lot. My daughter's 15, my son's 19. And now I'm just, because to him, I'm like, how as his father, what do I share with him? And I want to put so much stuff into his brain, but I want him to have his own journey. And it's tough being a father, so when I hear you say this, I guess maybe that's almost where I'm coming from. I'm like, okay, I don't want him to feel like he has to do what I do. And I don't want him to feel like he has to figure everything out, but I don't want him to have a crappy life either. So I better tell him this and I better tell him that. It's like this crazy balance. But anyway, so
well, I think that's part of like one of the things that I work with clients a lot on is, here's this thing that I'm feeling, like I want to find the way to communicate it. And then there's this perfect script right there. Like, have you tried saying that? And I'm sure you have like communicated a lot of these things to your son, but there's probably like, I don't know, I'm not a parent, like, full disclosure, but there's probably nothing wrong with what you just said. Like, what you just said is captured in tone. Like, I really care about you. I'm not sure like what the right one piece of advice is. I want to share my experiences with you, but I respect you and I love you enough that I want you to make your own choices. It's like, wow, like, if your son has gotten that message, that's pretty darn good starting point.
Cool. Okay. That's actually really helpful to me. So thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So how does, I wanted to get back to just some tips on handling some of what we're going through with quarantine fatigue, but before we go, maybe we can end with that. I'm curious, how does someone like yourself, being in the industry you're in, think about the economy? We touched on this before we started recording a little bit, like just your own, because I feel that in today's world, with all the kind of what I consider economic chaos that I see in the world, it presents a lot of interesting challenges for people, because even if you found that you're perfectly passionate about a certain career, job, or your own business, whatever it is, you then have this other thing that you should likely pay attention to, but for your retirement, and then what do you do? And it's almost like our current monetary system has mandated that everybody turn into this armchair economist. How are you handling that? Or what are your thoughts around that? Because to me, I don't like that. I feel like everybody should be able to save money as a reflection of their time and labor, and those savings should go up in value, and that the best purpose for all of us in society is for Dr. Jeff to focus on what Dr. Jeff does. And Dr. Jeff shouldn't have to be on the weekend figuring out, oh my gosh, what's the real estate prices going on? And do I buy some gold? Do I get some of this Bitcoin stuff? What's that about? So when I say all that, what comes to mind? And I guess I'm coming to you personally now, not
Yeah.
the Dr. Jeff. How are you handling that kind of stuff?
Well, I think unfortunately that is part of what has to happen, is that if we look at it from a values standpoint, financial health is a value, and it's a value domain that's going to help service other values, right? And by no means am I saying the more money you have, the better, but you have to realize that there is a domain around finances. And if you don't want to make a lot of money, that's fine. Like, you can live a really awesome values-based life, working minimum wage. And I think, like, I might get, roasted for saying that. But
No, I think we get your point. Yeah.
if you know what your values are, and you say values first, finances second, sure. But either way, finances is one domain that you want to take care of as you look at your different roles in the different value domains. And so unfortunately, the economic situation right now has required us to become these armchair economists. But I don't think that we don't all have the time. You're raising a family, you're trying to work a job, you want to go to your kids' hockey tournament, you don't want to be going to education,
Reading about the history of interest rates.
But I think there's a minimum. What I'd say is, like, there's a minimum level or threshold of financial self-defense that you gotta understand. And it can be as simple as picking up a few books, like the Rich Dad Poor Dad book. I think is a great starting point.
Yeah.
Just understand assets versus liabilities, and start from there. Understand different avenues for investment. You don't have to start day trading stocks, but I think that again, we can talk about whether stocks are a useful investment, or there are better investments out there. But
Jeff, there's something there. You dive into that. You share whatever you want there. You can tell there's something behind that statement. Right. You share whatever you want.
And I've been down that road, right?
We all have. We all have.
Industry. Well, here's what Warren Buffett does, and
I remember before the tech run up of the crash of, like, the NASDAQ crash, like 2000. I guess it was just shortly after New Year's in 2000, or was it 2001? Anyway, right around then, I was buying some stocks. It was like, I think the peak moment for me was that somebody, I feel like it was 1999, I was at Oracle. So I was in tech support still at Oracle there. And someone ran up to me and they said, "Oh my gosh, millionaire.com is going public. We have to buy it." And I remember thinking, really? Like, what do they do? And the person said, "Don't you get it? That's where all millionaires are going to go, on the internet." And I was like, wow, yeah, we should probably buy some of that.
Yeah.
Just like, there was no business model. There was nothing there. It was just millionaire.com. And I don't think I ever bought that. I don't even know if that did go public or whatever it was. But just the fact that I thought, yeah, that probably does make sense. And, we're all buying these stocks. Those were the crazy days. And I feel like we're back to those days a little bit with the crypto stuff that's happening right now, right? So I see
Dogecoins.
Yeah, the Dogecoin stuff. I see so many similarities with it. Like, Elon just tweeted about Dogecoin. We should buy some. And you're like, really? What is it? What is it all about? Who cares? Just buy it, right? So anyway, I can totally relate when you were talking about the stocks and stuff there. It's a little bit of a crazy world.
Yeah, but then, I think the upshot is to take an interest in your finance. We don't all get paid in Canadian dollars, but you're getting paid in this currency, and presumably you want to have some purchasing power throughout your life, particularly for a lot of us at the end of there's a commentary on retirement. We really want to focus on the last 5 to 10 years. But you probably, I try to avoid should statements, but probably should take some kind of minimal interest in this money thing and how it all works. I think that the baby step that I would say, if you don't have time, you don't at least think about where you're spending your money, because there are forces at play that are trying to take your money. You turn on the TV, you're going to get ads telling you to buy this crap. You're going to put on HGTV, paint this crap, this color, get this bench, get this countertop, get this, everyone will love it. And if you don't have a lens that you can filter that messaging through, and you don't have an understanding of assets versus liabilities, you're dead in the water, because you're just going to like buy all this crap, and then your nest egg, your purchasing power is going to be nil, because anything that you've have had to invest has gone out the door. It's been extracted from you via this messaging. So at a minimum, at least understand and think critically about who is trying to get you to buy what and why you are spending your money on a certain thing. I think that's step one. And then from there, you can say, okay, well, once I save some of my money and I don't just buy this crap that I'm being told to buy, then what's this thing called investing, and how do I keep my money safe? Which unfortunately right now has become increasingly complicated, at least in North America, because I think that a lot of other cultures, unfortunately, and societies, unfortunately, we're talking from a real place of privilege where we can say, like, traditionally our money has been somewhat sound. I think people in other countries were like, oh, like we've been dealing with this for decades.
Yeah, our whole lives. I'll just never forget my aunt when I stood next to her and she was exchanging dinars for German marks. And like, that was like what you did. You used the dinars as the currency to buy, the eggs. But if you had any intent of storing value and trying to actually save, you tried to get your hands on German marks. And that was so normal to them. Whereas here, we don't think of like, oh, like you might use Canadian dollars to buy your groceries, but geez, don't hold any real savings in Canadian dollars by any means. That's like a weird concept for most Canadians and everyone in North America. But you're right, it's around the world. Okay, so for the core beliefs, that component, I'm curious. Once you've identified somebody's core beliefs, or if somebody has self-diagnosed themselves, which I'm sure is the most dangerous thing I could ever say to you. But if somebody did do that listening to this, how do you go about, like, other than making an appointment with someone like yourself to work through it? Are there just, I don't know, the like best practices to try to change your thinking? Is it like a morning routine that you should have every day, or like what are some of the best practices to change some of your beliefs that are not serving you? Is there like an at-home guide to that?
Well, I would just say, as simple as it is to most people, pick up a couple of books. Like there's a book, I might have mentioned it last time I was on, called Reinventing Your Life. Like it's old school. It's from the 90s, but it helps you understand your core beliefs, your schemas, how to identify them, where they're coming up. There's also, and this is more, it's kind of a clinical workbook, but a book called Mind Over Mood. Again, like it's awesome, which is why we're still talking about it, 20 plus years after it was written. But at this point, it's corny, but I think that's part of the appeal. It's just like simple, like here's skills for identifying thoughts, feelings, behaviors. What are the patterns that I get myself into? So I'm not saying anyone's going to love reading those two books, but if you go and read those two books, you'll be further ahead in understanding your own thinking patterns, and you'll then be able to identify when certain thoughts and beliefs and behavioral patterns are helping you versus hindering you. And then I think that the other side is just, you got to understand what your values are in life. If you don't understand what's important to you, then you can do everything you want to identify what's getting in the way. But if you don't know what you're kind of shifting towards, then you're operating without a compass. And the other thing that's really important that I'd add on the values is, it's always a challenge to balance your different value domains. Work-wise, you may be spending a lot of time and focus there, and that's going well, but that's pulling away from your family time, your health time. So you're constantly shifting and reshifting the balance across the value domains. And I say to people, like, if you can get to, I'm kind of like 70% in the work domain, like I'm a 70% good family member. I'm a 70% good friend. My health is like 70%. I'm not winning any fitness competitions, but like, I'm okay. I'm reasonably healthy. 70% across those domains. I think that's kind of like almost like the holy grail. And maybe there's times you can be 80 and 1, but like,
Yeah, I'm so happy you said
tough.
that because I think some of the self-help industry went off the rails to me a little bit. By the time I was reading some of the books in my late 20s, there was a lot of talk about balance. And I think you and I have talked about this a little bit before, that like you can set up your life to be perfectly balanced. And I interpret that to mean that you could be 10 out of 10 on all these values. And you just have to set up your day properly. You get up and you meditate, and then you do exercise, and then you have some family time in the morning, a breakfast, and then you do this at work. And you could maybe maintain that schedule for a week or 2 weeks, or if you're lucky, maybe a few months. But life ultimately throws you curveballs. And then I would get a little frustrated that I wasn't really being able to follow these things and keep a perfect balance. And I've since come to learn that, to me, a happy life is not about balance in all these areas. It's about sometimes work does take priority, and I have to focus on it for 2 weeks. And I have to communicate to the family that, listen, right now, this requires focus for these reasons. And I'm ultimately going to circle back to the family. But right now I need to be pulled here. And then there's other times where it's family is the priority and work will suffer, and that's okay. And so it's kind of like this. I like what you said, 70% across the things. I've often looked at it like sometimes you go to a 9 or 10 on some areas, and you accept that some are going to be lower, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But maybe through the year, I get balance.
Totally.
But on a day, I was analyzing my life on a day because I was reading some of these books.
Right.
And I was considering myself like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Like, I didn't do all these things today. I'm like a failure. And I don't think I used failure, but I did have a sense of frustration. Yeah. Those schema. Yeah. And it frustrated me. Right. I was like, this isn't working for me. So it took a while to figure that out. So I'm glad you're saying it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't, there's never a perfect state of balance. There's never like a perfect day of balance. If you're lucky, you like get to the end of a week and be like, oh, wow, like that was pretty like balanced week, but there's no one, you can't consistently have balance. And I think the risk is some people might interpret this conversation and be like, wow, like, okay, like look at someone like Tom, like he doesn't have the answers. Like Jeff doesn't have the answers. They're just like being like, okay, well, life is like really hard. And so like kind of suck it up, I guess, and like try a bunch of different crap and like, good luck. Like, what are they talking about? But I think the answer is, yeah, life is hard. Everybody has distress, different times, different ways. And because life is hard and it's confusing and it's ambiguous, you must have values. And through living your values, that's how you get meaning. So I'm more about helping people get meaning than happiness, because I don't know how you get happiness. But I know that if you pull away from your problematic schemas and you turn towards your values, that's a meaningful life. And even if at the end of your life, you say, wow, like that was hard, a lot of work, stress, pressure. And hey, there's some times where I enjoyed things. I raised a family, or I built this thing that was meaningful and important to me. You're not going to say, oh, I wish I had more like fun and relaxation. You're going to say, well, you know what? That's a life. It's hard at times, but ultimately it was meaningful. And that's really what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's such a good way to leave that point. Just focus on your values and come from your values and identify your values. And you don't have to be perfect at hitting them, but ultimately that gives me selfishly, I guess, a sense of accomplishment and contentment. So even though I'm not maybe happy, I'm pretty happy. I don't want to say I'm not happy, but maybe not every day. There are some days like this morning, I was sharing, like this morning was like, oh geez, what's happening today? But when you come from the place of values, it does give you a certain sense of satisfaction. And that's very, I don't know if it's comforting or it gives you a sense of purpose, but it's been very valuable in my life. So to bring this to something that we're all going through, this quarantine fatigue that we started on this discussion, because it is raising our cortisol levels and, causing stress, and there's uncertainty. We never know if it's going to end. Is it going to be continued? Or, are we going to get to May 20th or whenever it is? And, are we going to be able to travel this summer? And it's just all this uncertainty. What are just some ways, and I know it comes back to some of the things we've talked about, but what are specifically on that one, what are some things we can do or think about, or how can we handle that one? Am I putting you too much on the spot here, or do you have some
No, that's good. I wish I had the one answer. And I think that, talking about kind of the self-help industry, we can get in these modes where like, there's one quick hack that you can do. I'm going to tell you right now, Tom,
yeah.
If you put this butter in your coffee, you're going to just feel amazing.
Hey, I did that for a little while. I did that for a couple of years, man. I did that for a couple of years. I like that one, but you're right. Yeah.
Nothing against that. I've never tried it, but nothing against that. But I don't have one quick tip to make you feel awesome during a pandemic. But I'd say, control what you can control and direct your behaviors at your values. And like right now, it's kind of like there's a dartboard. And we're blindfolded, and it's like, okay, well, let's just try to like throw our behaviors at our back. Like, okay, it's hard to exercise right now, especially, it's warming up, but especially through the winter. I'm going to try to like get on a bike or go for a walk or something. Awesome. You might be at like 50% of where you want to be as far as exercise, but that's good enough right now. We're in a pandemic. Same thing socially. It's like, oh man, I don't want to do like Zoom call. It's not perfect, kind of sucks. But when you feel okay to do it, or maybe even if you don't totally feel up to it, like push yourself. Okay, let's just try it. Let's talk to some people. My eyes are strained. I don't want to look at the screen, but I'm connecting socially. It's the best I can do right now. Excellent. So we can't go out on kind of like a date night with my partner. Let's make some, okay, let's do some popcorn and watch a movie. It's kind of boring. It's not perfect. Oh, I wish I could go to, Cineplex. But we can't.
That seems like an adventure now, going to a movie theater, like, oh my gosh.
I don't know if any will exist.
I know.
But I think that's part of it. Just like accepting that things are not perfect and you are not going to be able to kind of hit your targets in probably any domain. And if you disabuse yourself from the idea that you should be, then hopefully that, it's hard. It's painful, but hopefully you're minimizing any unnecessary suffering by like, what's wrong with it? Why can't I do this? Why are my exercise routines not better? Well, it's because
so you're changing your focus, even a little bit, changing the focus there.
To control what you can control, recognize that it's not going to be perfect. Recognize this is really hard. I think that bringing that meaning, like, it's like that old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. This sucks, but it is interesting. And hopefully you've got to believe that there's got to be something that comes of this for each person on a personal level that can inform your life and that you're going to be able to pass on to other people in the future. So find what that might be for you. But it's a hard time. Like there's no way around it. But I think you come back to the basics too, try to eat okay and try to move a little bit, do those things, recognize that it's hard, take healthy shortcuts.
I think that's underappreciated. I think it was a neuroscientist at conference I was at in LA once said the quality of your energy is highly related to the quality of food that you put in your mouth. And I just love the simplicity of that. If you don't put food full of nutrients in your body, then the energy that you produce is likely going to be crappy. If you put food in your mouth that's full of wonderful nutrients and nutrient dense, then your energy is likely going to be high powered and feel great. So it's such a simple thing that you just said, but that's an important one for sure. So anything else? I want to honor your time now. I'm taking you too long here. Anything else that you wanted to be covering or sharing while we're chatting today? I really appreciate you doing this, by the way, because I think your profession right now is like it's not that it's never been important. It's just more important now than maybe ever. And I can only imagine the the conversations you have between colleagues right now with what you're seeing out there. It just must be, it's almost like a case study on humanity for you, because there's going to be some personality types, maybe like myself, like, you can't lock me up, let me free, I want to travel, what are you doing? Pounding on the table. And there's other personality types that are going to just be very like, yes, I'll go along with what the government will tell us and stuff. So there's this mix of personalities, and just, it's an interesting time for you, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting is definitely the way that I'm looking at it. But I think I would just could have echo again, like I did last time, that like the value and the importance of this podcast as far as just good stuff, trying to help people in a number of different domains. Your entry point is the financial piece, the financial freedom, which happens to relate to the real estate piece, Bitcoin, gold, etc. But I just want to echo my gratitude, because I think we're all working from the same framework. Like, how can we contribute something that helps make people's lives more meaningful, that helps people go out and live their values? So yeah, I don't know if there's any, like, I'm pretty good for another question if there is any, but yeah, I just
I thank you for that. No, and I thank you for saying that, because I think that's the whole intent, that I feel like, but we can all support each other out here. And I'm very grateful that technology has come to the point where I can have this conversation with you, and you're in Ottawa, but because you think the same way, you can share, and to be able to distribute this through a podcast where someone could be jogging through the forest right now, listening to this and hearing some of this information, to me is very meaningful, and it helps me. So, yeah, no, I'm appreciative. Yeah. Okay. I did have a couple last things then, since you have a couple more minutes. When I hear some things, I was just writing down like a couple points we touched on, but I feel like I'm just interested in what you have to say about someone who says this to you. And I don't know if this is where my values come in or my core beliefs, but since I have you, I'm selfishly going to take you up on that. Is I have this core belief that I always think for the long term. So for example, when it comes to health, I'll do things that I don't want to do because I think it's better for my long-term being. In relationships, I'll try to make decisions that aren't emotional, but are the have the long-term best benefit for me. And with money, I think long-term. I'm never trying to there was a time in my life where, I was trying to maybe get rich quick, and I'm like, that doesn't work. So now I just think kind of long-term. And I think this has benefited me greatly over the last 10 and 20 years. Is that type of thinking, like almost like patting yourself on the back, is that something that's serving me, or is that something that like is, I'm trying to protect myself from other types of thinking? So I'm like, well, I always think for the long term, and the long term is the way to go. Like I'm not even asking you a good question here, Jeff, but when you hear someone say that, just what comes to mind for you?
The first thing is asking, is it getting in the way of living your values? And in your case, it doesn't sound like it is. If you had told me like, Jeff, like, we've done like pretty well with our real estate, but like, I'm really concerned with where things are going. Like I told the family, like back in 2008, like, guys, like no more vacations. Like maybe we go to like Florida once or twice every few years or something. But like no spending, and we just like lock down our spending. And, you're so fearful that you're not actually enjoying your life and your other values are suffering. Then I'd say, okay, well, that's
okay. So that's the context where to come out from any of your thinking. It's how is it serving your values? That's basically what it will come back to.
Yeah. I almost wonder with that one.
Yeah.
When we look at real estate, for example.
Yeah.
I think there's part of it where it's my understanding of where things have gone, at least from a Canadian literature on real estate perspective, is you had like, the Don Campbells who say, cash flow positive, this is how we should be looking at things. And now it's like, well, that's good. That's great. Like, of course, like cash flow positive. But I think there's all like that pull of people. Well, I bought this, place in Toronto or wherever, then it's cash flow negative, and I just made $200,000 in the past 5 years, right? So is like, is there? I think there's something to be said. Like, is sticking to the numbers in a cash flow positive sense, am I being too rigid? Like, when am I being too rigid? And this is probably a question from any kind of investment standpoint. When am I being too rigid in sticking to my system versus when should I kind of like get with the crowd and look at what's happening in the here and now? So I'm kind of like extending your question. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I guess
no, that's a fascinating thing to be, and it's something I think Nick and I have learned since we kind of turned this into a real estate thing a little bit here, is that you're never going to beat the monetary policy because it is so prevalent and will dictate things with much greater force than anything else. So you have to adapt your investing. And it's kind of why we felt comfortable buying, like back in 2010, 2011, property prices were already going up. We had many people tell us, well, we're not going to buy. And it was Hamilton specifically, because property prices went from like, you could buy a fully detached home, I know this is going to sound crazy, for $200,000 in Hamilton, and it went to $234,999. I'll never forget. And it was like, even our own team was like, whoa, I guess the party in Hamilton is over. And what we came to kind of realize is that monetary policy trumps so much, because if interest rates are pulled down, property prices, if you have the fundamentals of lack of supply, demand through population growth, and then this interest rates that just come down to make the cost of money cheaper, prices can go higher even if you think they can't. They're very highly correlated to monetary policy. So it kind of, we always kind of came from this point. It was almost like a realization in 2008, 2009, like, oh my gosh, like we can have the best of both worlds. We can focus on trying to buy cash flow properties, but instead of being scared to act because property prices have come up, if we understand monetary policy, we can buy at the higher price because we can protect ourselves by trying to find cash flow, but we can feel relatively confident the prices are going higher from here. So yeah, it's, I can totally see where you're coming from with that, how one line of thinking like cash flow only kind of prevents you from something else. And you really do, it's complicated. It's difficult, especially in our family. We were so burned in 1990 where we almost lost everything because we had, we were flipping properties. And then one we were stuck with specifically did not cash flow and was costing us about $1,000 a month to carry back in 1990 when our father's real estate drywall company was going in the tank. And so that's like a frame of reference then, our schema around that. And then it's hard to kind of convince yourself, whoa, like look at this other schema and to break out of it. So
I think that's what's scary now is I think that's a very bad sign, right? And when we're starting to say like, well, the cash flow, that doesn't really matter because the price is just going to keep going up. Like that's very, very
dangerous.
Bad. It reminds me
dangerous.
Of like have you ever seen a chart of the Venezuelan stock market?
Yeah, I think I have.
So it goes like this. It looks awesome. Yeah. But it's denominated in that currency.
Yeah. Bolivar.
It's easy to like sit back and, oh, well, look at all the spending. That's what's happening here. But you look at the amount of Canadian dollars that are in circulation and you like, of course, real estate prices have gone up because the price is denominated in Canadian dollars. So to me, this is just like, of course,
that's advanced thinking right there. You're deep in the rabbit hole. By saying that statement, you are deep in the rabbit hole.
It's a scary rabbit hole to be in, right? When because then you start saying, well, I get these CADs, these Canadian dollars. Like what I do, they're on fire. Where do I put them? I just like put them in the stocks or real estate or whatever, because it's just going to like keep inflating. Like that's a really awful place for an economy to be. So I don't mean that to be kind of like a doom and gloom message, but I think, you know, the scary part of
we're
what's
going to have to check
right
your
now,
schema on this, Dr. Jeff.
Okay. I think my schema is showing.
Yeah, no, but no, I'm with you. I'm with you. And even though it's hard, and in real estate specifically, even though it's hard to find cash flow or properties that break even, we could have grown this business, just so you know, much faster than we have, because we could have just thrown any property at anyone, prices just go up. We've had people come in here specifically from the condo market and say, you guys don't get it. You guys do not get it. You know, you buy these condos and they go up, and that's all you have to concern yourself with. And we're like, hey, listen, we're actually on the go up story because of monetary policy and what you're saying about these CADs. I love the way that you're saying it, by the way. But if we can find properties that are more difficult to find and might take us longer and might not, you know, if we can find properties that pay for themselves or produce some cash flow, then we're kind of like get the best of both worlds, because if crap hits the fan and things go down, we got our cash flow and the property pays for itself. And if they go up, even better. We have a property that cash flows and it's going up. And it's interesting that you see how the economy adapts. Like in this particular area around the Golden Horseshoe, around the Toronto area here, you couldn't find cash flow for a few years. And then all of a sudden, duplexes and second suites started popping up everywhere. Investors adapted. And people said, oh, I can buy this one property, and instead of making $1,800 a month on it, I can actually rent it out to two people, and the income's actually doubling on this thing. And then the cash flows back. So you can kind of see an economy respond in real time to some of the pressures. And it's a fascinating world to analyze. But anyway, we're off. I feel like I took us off track again on that, but
I think it's all related. And that's the, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's kind of a call to folks to just kind of like be aware of what's happening. And I think that there's, like, to me, there's a long-term message in there, and in the sense of like, how do we want to build our society? Because we've got a lot of short-term thinking, and we can get into, you know, how certain messages get amplified through social media, but it's clear that there is polarization across, you know, society, where some people want this thing and that thing, and because of social media, we get polarized. And I think one pole of that is, what do we don't no lockdowns, no nothing, no whatever. The other side, well, we just have to do this. Everybody stay at home, and we're going to spend, like, people need this resource and that resource and this and that, and like, of course, like, this is like kind of like wartime, where we don't want to do this, but we got to spend and we got to figure it out. But when we just get in this polarization, and I'm thinking, I don't know where I stand on it. I know we got to do something. We can't just let people get sick and die. But I'm also mindful of like, well, we can't just, you know, can totally destroy our currency, because what is that going to do to our society?
Yeah, it's almost like it's the second order effects of what we are doing. I feel like as a country, we're not spending enough time at least analyzing or putting weight around. It's the second order effects to me of all of our decision making in the last year. They're just completely being ignored. So I'm agreeing with you. You know, if we need to build a hospital or get some you know, investment in healthcare, absolutely, it's necessary. But at the same time, who in our leadership is looking at the second order effects of that? And we haven't talked about children, but, you know, I don't like it. Some of what I see happening with, you know, kids, you know, not there's like this almost an unconscious acceptance of like, maybe I won't go out to play and go outside. And I don't know, I feel like that's a dangerous thing to start getting instilled in yourself at an impressionable age. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe it's fine. Maybe that means that these guys will become the best computer scientists ever, because they're just stuck in front of their computers all day and they're going to save the world. Yeah. So maybe there's like, maybe there's a positive to it, but it's the second order effects that I feel like we are ignoring. So I'm kind of with you on that. You know, I wish there was a bit more analysis on that.
Yep. It's tough though. I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't think anybody does. And I think that's kind of part of my thinking is in anything. And let me tie this back to, your rock star message. Anyone who says they have the answer in anything in life, this is, if one thing I believe strongly is, run from that person. If they say, I know what's we must do this is the only way, this is right, run. Or you know what, I got the secret to wealth, this is what you got to do, this is what's right for you, this is what's right for everyone. Run away. Because anyone who doesn't have that ability to kind of see the shades of gray and think, no, I don't mean that the way it sounds. The message,
I think we
be
know what you
careful
mean.
who your role models are, who you're listening to, and let's think critically about all the big decisions in our lives, and try to make sure, whether it's our own life, our own relationships, the society we want to build, like, let's think about the values that long term we want to service. So that's kind of big and Pollyanna-ish, and I don't mean it to be, but I'm just trying to link in to get how we kind of link this pandemic and politics and economic decisions
and social
back to
media.
values.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. I feel definitely. It's almost like something you'll be writing about 10 years from now on this moment in time, because all these factors, like we have, and we'll wrap here because I have to start to wrap, but with monetary policy the way it is, social media the way it is, mix in a pandemic, you get all these things that polarize people on almost politics, health, money, and then you have an environment that's just pulling people to either this or that. And the room for discussion, which is, I think, what I appreciate about talking with you, Jeff, is that just talking like this, I find very helpful, and I enjoy. And I don't feel like there's just enough of it. And it's either you're pro this or anti this, and that's it,
Yeah, it's about ideas and, figuring out what's right for you, and admitting when it's unclear and when it's hard. I agree. We got to have more of this.
We'll bring you back to chat. Listen, I appreciate all the time I get to chat with you. I really do. So thank you.
Same here.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll, if it's not too much trouble, I'll bug you again in a few months. We'll gather up some questions and bring you back to get your thoughts on that. Hopefully we're partying on a boat somewhere. Maybe.
Oh, I'm sure we will be.
Yeah.
Right around the corner.
Yeah. But anyway, Jeff, thank you so much. So if someone wanted to track you down and find you, is the best place the website? What can you share?
Honestly, just go to LinkedIn, Dr. Jeff Perron. You'll find me. Feel free to connect or send a message there. Or I am not big on Twitter, but there's another spot. You can find me on Twitter. I think my handle is at Dr. Jeff Perron.
We'll link to, so that no one has to guess about that. Yeah, we'll link to both of those. And on LinkedIn, Perron is Perron. So if you're looking up Dr. Jeff Perron there, that's how to spell his last name. And we will link to LinkedIn, and we'll track down your Twitter profile and link to it as well. So anyone in the show notes, you can go to rockstarinnercircle.com/podcast, find this episode with Dr. Jeff, and we will have those links. That's it. Appreciate our chats. Pleasure getting to know you better and doing this. And thanks for this. Really, thank you.
For sure. Thank you.
Hey everyone, hopefully you enjoyed that episode of the show. You can find Jeff Perron on LinkedIn at the show notes, I guess, is going to be the best place to get the direct link, or just go to LinkedIn and search up Dr. Jeff, Jeff Perron, Perron, and you'll track him down. He is in the Ottawa area. We'll have a link to that LinkedIn profile in the show notes of this episode as well, which are available at rockstarinnercircle.com/podcast. And if you're thinking about jumping into the real estate market and you don't know where to begin, you can come to our free introductory 90-minute class by going to CanadianRealEstateTraining.com. That's www.CanadianRealEstateTraining.com. That's it for this episode. Until next time, your life, your terms.